It was a bright and sunny Saturday morning in Oakwood Heights. This was a quiet little neighborhood where nothing fun or exciting ever seemed to happen, at least that's what everyone thought. The houses sat in neat rows with green lawns and pretty flowers. Kids rode their bikes sometimes and birds chirped in the trees. It was peaceful, boring even. But that was about to change because something big was brewing and no one saw it coming. Let me introduce you to Jake Miller. Jake was just a regular guy. He wasn't super tall or super short. He didn't wear fancy clothes or drive a shiny car. He was the kind of person you'd pass by and not think twice about, but everyone in Oakwood Heights liked him. He was friendly. He smiled a lot. He mowed his lawn every weekend, making sure it looked nice and tidy. He waved at the mailman every morning, even if it was raining. And when the neighbor kids dropped a ball in his yard, he'd toss it back with a grin. Jake was just nice. But Jake had a best buddy who made his life a little louder, his dog Max. Max wasn't a tiny dog you could carry in a purse. Oh no, Max was big. He had floppy ears, a wagging tail, and a goofy smile that showed all his teeth. His fur was a mix of brown and black, and his bark was loud enough to wake up the whole street. Max loved to run around Jake's backyard, chasing squirrels or sniffing the grass. He was a happy dog, and Jake loved him like family. They were a team, Jake and Max, just living their simple, happy life. But not everyone was a fan of Jake and Max. There was one person in Oakwood Heights who couldn't stand them. Her name was Karen Baxter, and she was trouble with a capital T. Karen wasn't just any neighbor. She was the queen of the HOA, the Homeowners Association. That's a group of people who make rules for the neighborhood, like how tall your grass can be or where you can park your car. And Karen, she took her job way too seriously. She walked around with a clipboard in her hand all the time, writing down every little thing she didn't like. Her eyes were sharp, and her glare was so mean it could scare a bear away. When Karen looked at you, you knew you were in for a lecture. Karen acted like Oakwood Heights was her own little kingdom. She made sure everyone followed her rules. If your grass grew just half an inch too long, she'd leave a nasty note on your door. It'd say something like, "Cut your lawn or else," in big angry letters. If you forgot to bring your trash can in by 8 a.m., she'd bang on your door so loud you jump out of your socks. "Trash cans belong in the garage," she'd yell, waving her clipboard like a weapon. Nobody dared to argue with Karen. She was bossy, loud, and proud of it. Now Jake, he didn't bother anyone. He followed most of the rules. His grass was always short. His trash can was always put away. He didn't throw loud parties or leave junk in his yard. But Karen still didn't like him. Why? Because of Max. See, Max had barked at her prized rose bushes one day. Karen loved those roses more than anything. They were bright red and perfect, lined up along her front yard like little soldiers. She watered them every day and talked to them like they were her bobbies. So when Max ran by and let out a big woof at them, Karen lost it. She decided right then and there that Jake and Max were her enemies. From that day on, Karen had her eye on Jake. Every time Max barked, even just a little, she'd peek out her window with a frown. She'd scribble something on her clipboard and mutter to herself. Jake didn't know it yet, but Karen was planning something. She wanted him gone, or at least she wanted Max gone. She thought a dog like Max didn't belong in her perfect neighborhood. What she didn't know was that Jake and Max were hiding something special. Something that was going to flip her whole world upside down. Let's paint the picture a little more. Jake's house was small but cozy. It had white walls and a red roof with a little porch where he'd sit with Max in the evenings. His backyard was fenced in, perfect for Max to play. Across the street was Karen's house. Hers was bigger, with a fancy mailbox and those perfect rose bushes out front. She kept her windows spotless, and her lawn looked like it belonged in a magazine. The rest of Oakwood Heights was full of regular houses, some with swing sets, some with bikes leaning against the garage. It was a normal place, or so it seemed. That Saturday morning started like any other. The sun was shining and a soft breeze rustled the leaves. Jake woke up early like he always did. He stretched, yawned, and pulled on his favorite blue t-shirt. He walked to the kitchen, made some coffee, and looked out the window. Max was already awake, bouncing around the backyard, chasing his own tail. Jake laughed. "Silly dog," he said, sipping his coffee. He had no big plans for the day, just hanging out with Max, maybe throwing a ball around. It sounded like a perfect, easy day. Meanwhile, Karen was up too. She stood on her porch, her clipboard in one hand and a cup of tea in the other. She wore a bright yellow sweater and a scowl that could melt ice. She stared across the street at Jake's house, her eyes narrow. Max barked once, a quick, happy bark, and Karen's frown got deeper. "That dog," she grumbled. "Always making noise, always ruining everything." She tapped her pen on her clipboard, thinking hard. She warned Jake before. She told him to keep Max quiet. But Jake hadn't listened, or at least not enough for Karen. Today, she decided, was the day she'd do something about it. Jake didn't know what Karen was planning. He stepped outside with Max, letting the big dog run around the yard. "Go get Max," he called, tossing a tennis ball. Max leaped after it, his tail wagging like crazy. Jake sat on the porch steps, watching with a smile. The sun felt warm on his face and the air smelled like fresh grass. For Jake, this was what life was all about, simple moments with his best friend. But that peace wasn't going to last long. Trouble was coming, and it was wearing a yellow sweater. Here's the thing, Jake seemed ordinary, but he was. There was something about him and Max that nobody in Oakwood Heights knew, not the neighbors, not the mailman, and definitely not Karen. It was a secret, a big one, and it was waiting to come out. Karen thought she had the upper hand. She thought she could boss Jake around like she did everyone else. But she was wrong. Jake and Max were about to surprise her in a way she'd never forget. So let me ask you something, friends. What would you do if someone kept picking on you for no reason? Would you stay quiet? Would you fight back? Or would you have a trick up your sleeve like Jake? Stick around, because this story is about to get wild. I'm not going to tell you everything yet. Oh no, we're just getting started. But trust me, what happens next is going to make your jaw drop. Karen's perfect little kingdom, it's about to shake. And Jake and Max, they're the ones holding the earthquake. Imagine you're sitting on your couch, popcorn in hand, watching this all unfold. You're wondering, why is Karen so mean? What's Jake hiding? And what's so special about Max? Those questions are like little breadcrumbs I'm dropping for you. They'll lead you through the story step by step until you get to the big, exciting finish. So don't go anywhere. We've got a neighborhood showdown coming up, and it's going to be a doozy. Jake didn't know it yet, but that sunny Saturday was the start of something huge. Karen didn't know it either, but her bossy days were numbered. And Max, well, Max was just happy to chase his ball, oblivious to the storm he was about to stir up. The stage was set, the players were ready. All it took was one little bark to light the fuse. What happens when that fuse burns out, you'll see soon enough. For now, picture Jake on his porch, Max in the yard, and Karen plotting across the street. It's calm, but not for long. So grab a snack, get comfy, and let's keep going. This is just the beginning, and I promise it's going to be a ride you won't forget. What do you think so far? Are you Team Jake or Team Karen? Let me know, we've got plenty more to unpack. Okay, let's dive into the next part of this crazy story. Things are about to heat up in Oakwood Heights, and it all starts with a little bark from Max. Picture this, the sun is shining, the grass is green, and Jake is just trying to enjoy a normal day with his goofy dog. But someone isn't happy, someone named Karen. Get ready, because the trouble is starting now. It all began with Max's barking. Max wasn't a mean dog or a loud dog all the time, he was just happy. When a squirrel zipped across the yard or a bird landed on the fence, Max would let out a little woof. It wasn't a big deal. It was just a quick, cheerful sound, like Max saying, "Hey, look at that." Most people wouldn't even notice. If you were inside watching TV or eating a snack, you might not hear it at all. But to Karen Baxter, that woof was the worst thing ever. To her, it was like a giant horn blowing right in her ears, ruining her perfect, quiet neighborhood. Karen lived across the street from Jake, and she thought she owned the whole place. She called it her kingdom, even though it was just a regular street with houses and trees. Every time Max barked, Karen would lose her mind. Her face would turn red, redder than a ripe tomato you'd see at the store. She'd drop whatever she was doing, grab her clipboard, and march over to Jake's house like she was on a mission. Her shoes would slap the pavement hard, and her eyes would be all squinty and mad. When she got to Jake's yard, she'd yell, "Control that mutt, or I'll call the cops." Her voice was loud and screechy, like a teacher scolding a kid who forgot their homework. Jake didn't like fighting, he was a chill guy, so when Karen yelled, he'd just smile and nod. "Sorry, Karen," he'd say in his calm voice, "I'll try to keep him quiet." He didn't argue or shout back. He'd just stand there, hands in his pockets, looking at her like she was a grumpy cat hissing at nothing. But here's the thing, inside, Jake was starting to get annoyed. He didn't show it on his face, but deep down, he was tired of Karen's nonsense. Max wasn't hurting anybody. He was just a dog being a dog. Why couldn't she leave them alone? For a while, this was how it went. Max would bark a little. Karen would storm over and complain. Jake would say sorry. Then they'd all go back to their day. It was like a game they played over and over. But one day, everything changed. One day, Karen went too far and Jake's patience started to crack. It happened on a warm afternoon. The sky was blue with a few fluffy clouds, and Jake was in his backyard having fun with Max. He had a bright yellow tennis ball in his hand, the kind that bounces really high. "Go get it, Max," he said, tossing the ball across the yard. Max ran after it, his big paws thumping the grass. His tail wagged like a windshield wiper and his tongue flopped out of his mouth. Jake laughed as Max grabbed the ball and brought it back, dropping it at his feet. They were just playing, minding their own business, when trouble showed up. That trouble was Karen. She came stomping over from her house, her yellow sweater flapping as she moved. She looked madder than ever. Her face wasn't just red now, it was practically glowing. She marched right up to Jake's fence and stopped, her hands on her hips. She pointed a bony finger at Max, who was sitting there with the ball in his mouth, looking happy as can be. "That dog is a menace," she screeched. Her voice was so loud it made Max tilt his head like he was confused. "He's ruining this neighborhood. I'm sick of his noise." Jake stopped tossing the ball and looked at her. He crossed his arms and leaned against the fence. "Karen, he's just barking a little," he said. "He's not hurting anyone." But Karen wasn't listening. She shook her head so fast her hair bounced. "No," she snapped. "I've warned you too many times, Jake Miller. I'm done with this. I'm calling 911 right now." She pulled her phone out of her pocket and held it up like it was a prize she'd won. Jake raised an eyebrow. "Calling 911 for a dog barking? That sounded silly to him." He rolled his eyes, a little move that said, "Yeah, right." Then he shrugged and said, "Go ahead, Karen, call them. Max isn't doing anything wrong." His voice was still calm, like he wasn't worried at all. To anyone watching, it looked like Jake didn't care. But here's the secret Karen didn't see. Jake had a tiny smirk on his face. It was small, just a little curve at the corner of his mouth. As if you blinked, you might miss it. That smirk meant something was up. Jake wasn't scared. He wasn't mad. He was ready. Ready for what? Karen had no idea, but she was about to find out. Karen didn't notice the smirk. She was too busy being angry. She tapped her phone with her shaky finger, muttering to herself about rules and respect. She thought she was in charge, like always. She thought calling the cops would fix everything, teach Jake a lesson, get rid of Max, make her kingdom perfect again. She stood there by the fence, glaring at Jake, waiting for him to beg her to stop. But Jake didn't beg, he didn't even move. He just watched her, that tiny smirk still there, like he knew something she didn't. Max, meanwhile, didn't care about any of this. He dropped the ball and started sniffing the grass, his tail wagging again. To him, it was just another fun day. He didn't know Karen was mad. He didn't know she was about to call the police. He was just a happy dog living his best life. But that happiness was what drove Karen nuts. Every woof, every wag of his tail made her angrier. She couldn't stand it. The air felt thick, like something big was about to happen. You could almost hear the tension, like a rubber band stretched tight, ready to snap. Karen thought she was winning. She thought she'd finally beat Jake and his noisy dog. But Jake's smirk said otherwise. Something was coming, something Karen wasn't ready for. She was walking right into a trap, and she didn't even know it. All right, friends, let's keep this story rolling. Things are heating up in Oakwood Heights, and it's about to get even more exciting. Karen's getting louder, Jake's acting strange, and something big is coming. Picture it like a movie. Every minute makes you wonder what's next. Ready? Here we go. After that day by the fence, Karen didn't calm down. Nope, she got louder. Over the next few days, she turned into a grumpy volcano ready to explode. She'd stand on her porch every morning, her arms crossed, staring at Jake's house like it was her enemy. Her yellow sweater was bright enough to see from a mile away, and her frown was deeper than ever. She'd mutter stuff under her breath, things like rules and standards. Sometimes she'd say it loud enough for people to hear. This neighborhood has rules. The standards must be followed. She'd wave her clipboard around like it was a magic wand that could fix everything. Karen wasn't just mad at Max anymore. she was mad at Jake too. Every time she saw him, her eyes got squinty and mean. If Jake walked outside to get his mail, she'd huff and puff. If Max peeked out the window, she'd shake her head and scribble something on her clipboard. She acted like Jake and Max were the worst things to ever happen to Oakwood Heights. To her, they were breaking her perfect little world apart, one bark at a time. But Jake, he didn't seem bothered, not one bit. He stayed cool as a cucumber. He'd water his flowers, play with Max, or sit on his porch like nothing was wrong. Most people would be worried if someone like Karen was mad at them. They'd pace around or bite their nails thinking, oh no, she's going to make my life awful. But not Jake. He didn't pace, he didn't frown, he just kept smiling, calm as ever. And here, where it gets interesting, he started acting different. Jake would look at Max in a funny way. Not a normal, hey, good boy look. No, this was a knowing look, like he and Max were sharing a secret. He'd pat Max on the head and say stuff like, we've got this, right, buddy, in a quiet voice. Max would wag his tail and bark once, almost like he was saying, yup. If you watched close, you'd see Jake's eyes twinkle a little, like he was holding back a laugh. It was weird. Why wasn't he scared? Why was he so chill when Karen was practically breathing fire across the street? The neighbors started to notice. They'd peek out their windows or chat over their fences, whispering to each other. Why's Jake so calm? They'd say. Karen's losing her mind over there. She's going to ruin his life. One lady, Mrs. Thompson, who lived next door, told her husband that Karen's going to call the cops or something. Poor Jake doesn't even seem worried. Another guy, Mr. Peters, scratched his head and said, he's too relaxed. Something up with that guy. They couldn't figure it out. To them, Jake should have been sweating bullets, but he was just Jake. Days went by and Karen's grumbling got worse. She'd stomp around her yard, checking her rose bushes, glaring at Jake's house every chance she got. She'd talk to herself louder now, saying things like, that dog's a problem, I'll fix this. The neighbors could hear her from their porches. She was like a storm cloud, getting darker and darker, ready to burst. And Jake, he'd wave at her sometimes just to be nice, but that only made her madder. Her face would turn red again and she'd march inside, slamming her door so hard the windows shook. Then came the big moment. It was Friday afternoon and the sun was still high in the sky. Oakwood Heights was quiet, well, almost quiet. A delivery truck rumbled down Pine Street, its engine making a low growl. Max was in the backyard, sniffing around like usual. When the truck rolled by, he perked up his ears, watched it for a second, and let out one loud woof. It wasn't mean or scary, just a big happy bark, like he was saying, hey truck, hi. Most people would have smiled at that. But not Karen. To her, that bark was the last straw. She'd been waiting for a reason, and now she had it. Karen was on her porch, holding a glass of lemonade, when she heard Max. Her head snapped toward Jake's house so fast you'd think it hurt. Her eyes got wide, then narrow, and her mouth turned into a tight, angry line. That's it, she yelled. She slammed her glass down on the porch railing, grabbed her phone from her pocket, and held it up like a weapon. She was done waiting, done warning, done with Max and Jake. Jake was on his porch at that moment, sipping a soda. He had a can of cola in his hand, the kind with little bubbles fizzing at the top. He leaned back in his chair, one leg crossed over the other, watching Max through the window. He looked so relaxed, like he was on vacation. When Karen started yelling, he glanced over at her, but he didn't jump up or run inside. He just sat there, taking another sip, cool as ever. Karen didn't waste a second. She punched the numbers into her phone 9-1-1 and pressed it to her ear. "Hello, yes," she shouted into it, loud enough for the whole street to hear. "There's a dangerous animal loose on Pine Street. Send help now." Her voice was sharp and fast, like she was reporting a lion or a bear, not a goofy dog with a wagging tail. She paced back and forth on her porch, nodding as she talked, her free hand waving in the air. "Yes, it's a dog, a big, loud one. Hurry." The neighbors poked their heads out again. Mrs. Thompson gasped and said, "She's really doing it." Mr. Peters shook his head and muttered, "That lady's nuts." Kids on bikes stopped riding to watch. Everyone was staring, some at Karen, some at Jake. They thought Jake would freak out now. I mean, who would? The police were coming. Most people would be scared or mad or at least a little nervous. But Jake, he didn't budge. He took another sip of his soda, set the can down, and leaned back even more. He looked way too relaxed for a guy who was about to get in trouble. What was he hiding? Why wasn't he worried? The neighbors whispered louder now. "He's too calm," they said. "What's going on?" Karen didn't notice. She was too busy yelling into her phone, thinking she'd won. She thought the cops would show up, take Max away, and make Jake sorry. She thought she was the queen again, fixing her kingdom, but that little smirk was back on Jake's face, tiny, snaky, and full of secrets. He watched Karen like he knew something big was coming, and it was. Oh, it was. So what do you think, friends? Why was Jake so chill? What's his secret? Hold on tight, because the next part's going to blow your mind. We're building up to something huge, don't miss it. Alright friends, this is it, the big moment you've been waiting for. We're at the top of the roller coaster and it's about to zoom down with a huge surprise. Karen thinks she's won, but something wild is about to happen in Oakwood Heights. Get ready, it's going to be awesome. So hear what went down. Just minutes after Karen made her big 911 call, a police car rolled up to Pine Street. Its lights weren't flashing and its siren wasn't blaring, but it still looked serious. The car stopped right in front of Jake's house, parking neatly by the curb. The tires crunched on the gravel and the doors popped open. Two officers stepped out. They were tall and wore dark blue uniforms with shiny badges on their chests. They had hats pulled low over their eyes and their faces looked calm but firm, like they meant business. Karen saw the car and smirked. A smirk is like a sneaky smile, but meaner, like she was saying, "I got you now." She crossed her arms tight over her yellow sweater and stood on her porch looking proud. "Finally," she said loud enough for everyone to hear, "someone's going to deal with that beast." She meant Max, of course. To her, Max wasn't a goofy dog with a wagging tail. He was a monster who barked too much and ruined her perfect neighborhood. She thought the cops were here to fix everything, to take Max away and make Jake sorry. She was so sure she'd won, like she'd just hit the jackpot in a lottery game. Karen didn't wait. She rushed off her porch, her shoes clacking on the steps, and hurried over to the officers. She waved her arms like a kid trying to get the teacher's attention. "That's him," she shouted, pointing a bony finger at Jake's house. "That's the guy with the crazy dog. He's been a problem for weeks." Her voice was loud and sharp, cutting through the quiet afternoon air. The neighbors, who'd been watching from their yards and windows, leaned closer. Mrs. Thompson peeked through her curtains. Mr. Peters stood by his mailbox, eyes wide. Even the kids on bikes stopped pedaling to stare. Everyone thought, "Oh boy, Jake's in trouble now." Jake was still on his porch, sitting in his chair with his soda can in hand. He hadn't moved an inch since Karen called the cops. He looked chill, like he was watching a boring TV show instead of facing police. When the car pulled up, he glanced over, but he didn't jump up or run inside. He just took another sip of his cola, the bubbles fizzing quietly. Max was inside now, lying by the window, his big head resting on his paws. His tail wagged a little, like he was happy to see the car. Everything seemed normal, except it was. Then something weird happened. Really weird. The officers didn't march over to Jake's door like Karen wanted. They didn't pull out handcuffs or shout, "Come out here." Nope. Instead, they turned toward Jake and saluted. Yep, they raised their hands to their hats in a quick, sharp salute, like soldiers do for their boss. One of the officers, a guy with a deep voice, smiled and said, "Hey, Sarge, we got a call about Max. Everything okay?" "Sarge, what?" The other officer nodded at Jake, like they were old friends catching up. Karen's jaw dropped. Her mouth fell open so wide you could have tossed a tennis ball in there. Her eyes bugged out and her arms flopped to her sides. She looked like she'd seen a ghost, or like someone had just told her the sky was green. She froze, standing there in the grass, staring at the officers and Jake. The smirk was gone. Now she just looked confused, like her brain couldn't figure out what was happening. Jake grinned, a big, happy grin that showed his teeth. He set his soda can down on the porch railing and waved the officers over. "Yeah," he said, his voice calm and easy, "just Karen being Karen. Max is fine, right, boy?" He tapped the window and Max popped his head up. His tail wagged harder now, thumping against the floor like a drum. Max barked once, a